All right. For the last talk, we have Malte Junge, who's going to be talking about the relationship between platinum group minerals and chromite.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's a nice opportunity to give the last talk. It was a busy day. Stay with me. I will show you something a bit different, what we have seen so far. I will focus on platinum group minerals and what I might have an effect or what is their contribution on these deposits. So certainly they occur associated mainly with mafic, ultramafic rocks, of course with layered intrusions. Most of you have seen PGMs in your rocks. There are also something in ophiolites. We heard about this also a bit today. But there are also some influences on post-magmatic processes. So I will talk about this as well, a little bit of metamorphism, hydrothermal processes, and also a bit what near-surface processes do with these nice minerals. And yeah, what is maybe a bit challenging if you study these minerals is their size. So they tend to be in a micrometer scale. So this is from the UG2 chromitite. You have these nice platinum iron alloys, some laurite crystals. These are actually quite relatively large minerals. Some rare cases. So this is what you would see when you visit a museum. For instance, if you had the chance to go to Vienna, you would see one of these very nice big platinum iron alloys from the Ural Mountains, 6 kilograms. So quite impressive to see this. Or even here in London, there's this nice sparolite. They just took it out a few weeks ago to take some pictures. Was found 1924, so 100th anniversary. Just a reminder for this event of the discovery of the Merensky Reef. This is not from the Merensky Reef, but showing you a very nice sparolite crystal. Whenever you come to Munich, you're welcome to visit me at the museum. We also have some quite nice nuggets, kilogram size more or less, and also some places from the discovery site, for instance, from Colombia, where PGEs or PGMs were first discovered, and the Ural Mountains. So we found them in places. Talk a bit about as well. In general, they form quite a large group. So there are more than 150 PGMs approved by the IMA. I'm not going to talk about all of them, so don't worry. There's some new improvements. Louis Cabri is very busy still finding out new PGMs. He's also busy disproving his previous PGMs, so there's quite a bit of development going on. But when you look at reflected light microscopy image or microscopy, you will see that they typically occur associated with sulfides. So an example here from the Merensky Reef. This is for the Platte Reef. And in rare cases, and we have seen this before, we can also find them in inclusions in chromite. And as Sarah also mentioned, this is usually laurite, ruthenium sulfide. But also when you look at ophiolites, so this is a bit different processes affecting these PGMs, you find some PGM inclusions also associated with serpentine minerals. So reflect light microscopy is the tool how to look at this. If you have a lot of time spending on nice textures, what is faster? Or maybe first here this table. So if you're interested to work on PGMs, you don't need to look at these 150. This are, in my opinion, the most important ones. There's a big group of PGE sulfides. There's cuparite, malonite. There's a platinum palladium sulfides. Malonite is a copper platinum sulfides. When you work with ophiolites, or particularly looking at PGMs and chromite, you might figure out that this laurite, ehrlichmannite group is of interest. So also the osmium sulfide. There's a rare group of sparolites. It's a platinum arsenite, or this is a common group, but it's the only arsenic phase. And the sulfarsenite, bismutotellurite, and a group of alloys. So these are the most important PGMs, in my opinion. What they are, they're different PG silicates, oxides, recently discovered germanium phases, and you can study them here nicely with reflected light microscopy. But another technique, probably familiar to most of you, is automated mineralogy. So just the software using the scanning electron microscope to look really also on the micrometer scale on your samples. And this makes things a bit more easier if you would like to study these very small platinum group minerals in your sample, because so you produce based on phase difference. The software identifies the mineral, does an EDX spectra. This is then compared with the reference material, and then you could later on get an idea about how many PGMs you have, what is their grain size distribution, and also what is the associated minerals, because this is also interesting or important for the formation, also from an economic point of view for beneficiation later on. So this makes it a bit more easy to get some more statistical information. There were also some talks earlier about the nugget effects of PGMs. When you always look at the 2D surface, of course, it's a big advantage here. If you have a concentrate of PGMs, you would get some better statistical information as well. So probably also familiar with this. So this is a short course just to put these kind of slides here as well. Of course, we have them incorporated in sulfides due to their high partition coefficients. A lot of people worked on this experimentally, also here in the audience. But this is certainly the point how we get platinum group elements in the first hand in these sulfide liquids. And then there's this normal cooling processes forming later on our typical sulfide assemblages and also these PGMs. But this is why it's also important to look at this, because of course, these different parameters, which are necessary for the formation of the sulfide liquid and the incorporation of these platinum group elements, played an important role. And like I said, also the alteration or the effects later on the sulfide on the platinum group distribution. So the question is, how are these PGM then formed? How are they incorporated? At what stage? There's a very nice work Eduardo and Sarah Jane did here on the sulfide liquids as well regarding palladium and what is the influence on pentlandite. So most of you are probably familiar with this work, but it's very nice to show this. And yeah, when you talk about these sulfides, of course, there's a lot of work also done on in situ methods, laser ICP-MS, electron microprobe, already showing that we do have PGEs incorporated in these sulfide liquids. This is one example here in the UG2 chromitite. You see it's mainly palladium, rhodium, iridium, which is sitting in the particular the pentlandite. The other three PGEs are not so abundant, typically are below the detection limit of these methods. And it's also particularly the pentlandite. So the studies, again, the Chicoutimi group did this quite a lot, looking at pyrite, also with Ruben here on PGEs and chalcopyrite. But in this case, it's mainly pentlandite hosting these sulfides. So this is just important to keep in mind when you look for your samples and look at your whole rock data. This is certainly one opportunity that not all PGEs are as platinum group minerals. Also, the other way around is not true. So because they are PGMs. So it's important to make a mineralogical characterization of your ore as well. So we have seen that when we have this typically PGE ores, we have these incorporated in sulfides, and we've seen that this is particularly for these sulfidic ores, typically the case for palladium, rhodium. But we also have these large group of platinum group minerals, which basically form all kind of PGEs, different semi-metals attached to this. And when you're dealing with this in situ methods, there's always a question coming up when you have a laser beam of 50 micrometers or 1 micrometers, what is actually the signal you get? Is it just because you have incorporation in your sulfides? Is it solid solution? Or do we have some minerals included which are just below or smaller than the size you have from your method? So what we once did some time ago, we're cutting TEM tip foils from pentlandite, which was particularly rich in PGEs. so 150 nanometers sized, and we were able to look at the nanometer scale. And we could see that there are PGMs on the nanometer scale already existing in the sulfide minerals. So this is certainly one contribution to your signal, but there's also quite a lot of abundance of PGs in solid solution. So when you look at these white patches here, this TEM image, this is enrichment of rhodium and iridium in the pentlandite. Iron nickel is going down, so you would have this simple solid solution or substitution in the pentlandite structure. So probably both is true, having really these nanometer-sized inclusions, but also simple solid solution in the sulfide liquid, or the sulfides. There's a lot of work on nanometer-sized platinum group minerals. Jose Maria and his group did. There will be a nice talk. I hope it's a nice talk, but there will be a talk. It's a platinum symposium by him. So looking forward to hear this. But he has shown that it's quite common processes to have these PGMs forming already on a nanometer scale. And he showed this for various deposits. And he also showed that there's a compositional variation. So even on a nanometer scale, you have some variations. For instance, when you look here, this is laurite, this ruthenium sulfide. In the blue, you have this ehrlichmannite, the osmium sulfide. So it's not so homogeneous, these PGMs. So this is also just something to take into account when you analyze these minerals by electron microprobe, for instance, because there might be really some nanometer-sized inclusions within the PGMs themselves, which then might give you a different signal as well, a different composition. Also here you see that there's a lot of stuff going on really on the nanometer scale. So this would also help us to, or tell us something about the formation conditions of these PGM associated to the timing of the sulfide and also the chromite. Last picture about nanometer scale. When these very high concentrations, there are these lamellas shown on the really few nanometers. And when you look at this area producing this electron diffraction pattern, what you can see here, you will see that these Bragg reflections correspond to the pentlandite. And you will see that additionally to these, you will have an additional reflection. And this is simply due to the fact that at a certain concentrations, when the PGEs are in the sulfides, they tend to incorporate on a certain lattice site, very specific lattice site, forming these additional reflections in the pentlandite. So it would be the first step before having its own PGM with higher concentrations. But also something what is interesting when you look at the nanometer scale is that you find in this example a platinum group mineral. It's a PGE alloy. It's almost micrometer sized, so it's micrometer sized. But when you produce here this electron diffractions pattern, you would see that in this higher order, these reflections seem to be a bit or too moving or too attaching to each other. So the idea is that this could be an idea for having two platinum group minerals which grew to each other with a slight misorientation, growing further, producing this pattern here. And this would argue for a study Marianne Trédoux did some decades ago about the idea of having precursors or embryos as platinum group minerals, which were already formed at a very early stage, just growing by grain to grain, more or less, not like the classical idea of crystal growth in these cases. So it's probably also a contribution to the general formation of these platinum group minerals in the timing. We heard about this now quite a bit. So I don't focus on this, but I think it's still important if you talk about PGMs and chromite to consider also PGs and sulfide, but also PG and chromite. Sarah mentioned there's quite a big group or other group of people working on this. So Sarah with her group, but also experimental work done there. Yomo Park, who worked, did a lot of this work as well, to show that chromites or particular PGEs, particular IPGs, are incorporated in the chromite structure as well. Well, the idea is that at least when analyzing chromites by laser ICP-MS, we get a signal of actually relatively high concentrations of ruthenium, for instance, and also the other IPGEs. This is probably also, as we have seen earlier, that's a substitution in the chromite structure of the IPGE and rhodium, which fit in the structure, as we have seen here, depending on these different sites, octahedral and tetrahedral sites. But as I said, there are other people who could talk more about this in greater detail. When we now move to the different settings where we have these PGEs or these PGMs forming, we move back to the Bushveld complex. And looking at the chromitite seams, there's one example from the UG2. This is roughly 1 meter sized. Grade is always varying, but this is just to give some rough numbers. And if we look at other chromitites, the lower and middle group chromitites, it's a study these are mainly mined for chromium, as you know, but there are some ideas to process platinum group elements also as a byproduct. There's a company currently working on this. We got some concentrates. So this is automated mineralogy. So this is grain counting. So we have a few thousand PGMs in these samples. So we could get some relatively good statistic information about the PGE mineralogy of these different chromitite seams. And what you can see here, there's western limb and eastern limb. There's the LG6, and there's examples from the MG1, MG2. And you would see that they roughly look similar. So there are a bit different proportions here, but you would see that most of these PGMs in these ores are platinum palladium sulfides. Remember, this malonite is a copper platinum sulfides, and there's sulfur arsenides. So we have this laurite. So most of these PGE minerals in these ores are PGE sulfides, a few PGE sulfur arsenides. And when you do this automated mineralogy, I think another good advantage is that you get also nice information about area percentage. And this is important to consider because when you would compare only frequency data, so simply grain counting, this is shown here, all these red columns, compared to these blue columns, which are area percentage, you might get a little bit different information. So for instance, here in this sample, we look from the LG6 chromitite from this concentrate. We do have laurite from frequency data relatively low, but you would see that laurite is typically quite large. So you have a few laurite grains, but they have quite a large surface. So they have a larger influence to the entire PGE budget from a PGE mineralogy point of view that you would expect by simple grain counting. The other way around is with these PGE sulfur arsenides. We have quite a high number here by frequency data, but it would tell you you rather have quite a lot of smaller grains, which in total actually have a less influence. So just consider if you do this kind of work, make sure you also have a look at area percentage, not just grain counting. When we look at the other mineralogy or the other reefs, the Bushveld complex, we see that in the sulfidic ores, like the Platte reef, but the Merensky reef is quite similar. You will see that these are mainly PGE bismutotellurides. So again, here in blue, the area percentage, more than 50% of our concentrate we analyzed here were PGE bismutotellurides. The other PGMs are relatively rare. There are some, at least in this case. But again, if you compare this with this diagram I showed you before, we have seen that in the chromitites, we see that these are mainly PGE sulfides or PGE arsenides. That would be the sperrolite, some platinum iron alloys, but we would hardly find these bismutotellurides. So there seems to be some differences in the PGE mineralogy comparing these rather massive chromitite seams compared to the sulfidic ores like we have within the Merensky Reef or the Platte Reef. Bushveld complex, of course, very known for PGMs. Just from a mineralogy point of view, 16 PGMs are described in Bushveld as a type locality. Again, just a recent one, a few weeks ago, this new PGM was discovered, named after one of the person responsible for the discovery, for the discovery of the Merensky Reef. So again, a hint for the 100th anniversary. When we talk about Bushveld, there's something quite rare, quite unique. Thomas Oberthal was quite busy in the last years to publish his data on these pipes, stonitic pipes. These are discordant ore bodies which crosscut the lower critical zone. And as one example from the Onverwacht, which is one of these 4 pipes, you will see that this is particularly platinum dominated. So you will see here, in comparison to the Merensky Reef, for instance, it's very, very much rich in platinum. You hardly find any sulfides in these. There are different ideas, formations. Roger Schoon also did a lot of work on these pipes. The idea from Thomas Oberthal is that there was some formed by upward penetration of magmas, replacing the existing cumulates, and then fractionation of olivine resulted in more iron-rich melt. These pipes are very iron-rich olivines, and then the melt contains these mobile supercritical water-bearing fluids that also contain the PGEs and then formed these platinum iron alloys. So you have them relatively big. So this is a platinum iron alloy next to chromite grains, but you also find some interesting platinum group mineralogy. So all these different colors in the reflected light microscopy image represent a different PGE mineral. And if you look at platinum iron alloys, you would also see that there are certain groups involved. So it's not just one same stoichiometry. There are different PGE alloys involved as well. Coming to a different example, this is now some data from the Stillwater complex. Hazel Pritchard, we've heard I think a similar paper today. Again, here one thing to mention, also here they looked at the difference between grain counting and area percentage. You would see that this has quite a big influence, in particular when you have quite a large PGE mineralogy. And what they also did, they looked at how does the PGE mineralogy differ from those which are interstitial to the chromite to those which are sitting within the chromite. Within the chromite, it looks relatively boring. We only just have these laurite minerals included, as we have seen from previous talk as well, but also what I showed you from the UG2 chromite. So there are different ideas how these are formed or modified. And one idea was that it's formed from exsolution from the associated base metal sulfides, which are hosting these PGEs, and recording crystallization and sulfur saturation after the chromite crystallization. And the idea that these platinum group minerals, which are sitting in the chromite, one idea from them was the diffusion of IPGE and rhodium into the base metal sulfides inclusion sitting in the chromite, and particularly where you have these more rounded laurite grains, ruthenium sulfide, or that it's simply a diffusion directly from the chromite of the IPGE forming this laurine. Yes. So saying a few words, only one slide actually, about these ophiolites, because this is a very characteristic PGE mineralogy. If you're interested in this, I recommend you to read this paper by Jose Maria. There's a reference list at the end, so in case you are interested to see this. But what is very dominant here is that most of the platinum group minerals in the ophiolites are these laurite ehrlichmannite groups, or ruthenium osmium sulfides. What they did is they also looked a bit at differences between unaltered cruciform chromites and altered. This is simply typically influenced by metamorphism, for instance. So there are some differences, particularly in the altered stuff. You would have more platinum, palladium minerals compared to the unaltered stuff. They also identified different types of chromatites, where you would also see some slight differences between unaltered and altered. But the idea they propose mainly is that we have mixing of multiple melts there, and that's the physical entrapment from these in the chromite. Or that the other platinum group minerals have precipitated directly from or associated with metasomatic fluids or melts, which affected the existing chromatites as well. What is also important when you consider or studying platinum group minerals is to have a look at the compositional variation, because they are also relatively broad range of composition. So looking at electron microprobe work, for instance, of alloys. So this is an example from ruthenium, osmium, iridium alloys found collected in placer deposits worldwide. And you will see that all these placers originate from different locations or from different geological settings. And I will show you in the next slides a little bit how we use this also from a placer or from a river system in Germany, actually, to have a look at what is the potential source for these platinum group minerals. So because those could potentially reveal also some information about how they are formed and the conditions. For instance, platinum iron alloys, there's a large correlations also with palladium, so easily similar properties. So you could also exchange these. But you would see that there's forming here these yellow circles. It's isoferroplatinum, so a certain type of PGE alloy. And blue is ferrone platinum, and red is tetraferroplatinum. So simply some large group of different PGE alloys. So it's good to have a look also at these composition. When you do this, you will also see that there are some immiscibility gaps. So also in these alloys is not measurable at all, completely. But as I said, this can also help you this compositional variation to compare some different settings. And this is this work Hayter, Pritchett and co-authors did when they analyzed these laurite crystals of the still water complex and compared it to different settings like layered intrusions, because it fits quite well. But when you compare these laurite also with ophiolites, you would see again what I showed you earlier, that osmium, of course, the osmium sulfide is quite more dominant in these ophiolites. So it has a complete different variation, also with other settings, Ural-Alaskan types, with some overlap, but you could use this as an indicator of the source area when you look at places. This is what we did just recently when we collected some platinum group minerals from a river in Germany, the Elbe River. So it's was concentrating from a gravel plant, actually. So we were able to collect or to upgrade quite a lot of platinum group minerals and gold. And we have seen that there's also something going on with the mobilization. So something what is of course known for gold grains in this area. You mobilize silver more easily, leaving a gold-rich rim around this gold grain, but we also see some mobilization of some of the PGEs in this environment, so also affecting the platinum group mineralogy. But what we did here is that we also analyzed the composition of these alloys. So what we can see here again, this ruthenium, osmium, iridium diagram of these alloys. In blue, we have here the compositional variation from ophiolites. In this red-orange Ural-Alaskan type, which are typically ruthenium poor. And for comparison here in yellow study, Thomas Obertür did on the Rhine River. And here these data from the Rhine is more or less overlapping these ophiolites. So this is probably the source from the Alps where we have some these ophiolites. But we also tend to have some of these crosses which represent the composition of the PGMs we have from the Elbe. And this could be used to correlate some different source regions. There's a Ransko massive. Some people talked about this during coffee break already, which is currently of interest for different European projects. But there are also other occurrences along the stream, which might be the source for these platinum group mineralogy pattern we see. Also here in Eastern Germany, there's some occurrences of platinum group minerals. These are mainly PGE bismuth tellurides. We don't find these in these samples we had. And when you compare this with review paper Obertür did some years ago on places, it's the recent work Louis Cabrier did as well, where you can see that when you look at different places from these layered intrusions as well, or other types, you would find a certain PGE mineralogy in these places. So these are dominated by these different alloys. There's a sperolite, laurite ehrlichmanite, so these different PGE sulfides. But we hardly find any of these PGE bismuth tellurides. So despite the fact that they are quite abundant in the Great Dyke as well, in the Merensky Reef, we don't see them, and simply by the fact from a mineralogical point of view that they are very unstable, so they tend to weather quite quickly. So again, this tells you that the mineralogical composition of your ore, of your in your placer deposit might tell you something about the potential source, and yeah. But despite the fact that there are certain minerals not present, just means that they are simply not stable during this transportation. Don't need to go into detail here because we should have seen this again, but reference to a paper Brian and Jose Maria did some time ago, which is a very nice review on this work as well. But trying to explain the enrichment, or one model trying to explain the enrichment of the IPGE in this chromite. Simply, so we heard about this earlier, but simply because we have these selective uptake of chromium 3+ and iron 3+, producing this boundary layer and having preferential uptake of these IPGE, and then potential growing of, so either incorporation of the IPGE in the structure or potentially growing of some platinum group minerals. The last slide, I would just like to talk a bit about other modification of the PGE mineralogy. This is a very detailed work Kai Bachmann did on the algae chromitites. It's in the Tava mine, it's northwestern limb of the Bushveld complex. So here seen that there's a certain PGE mineralogy assemblage dominated again by PGE sulfides. So similar to what we have seen or what is published on different chromatites. The nice thing about this is again automated mineralogy. So you see directly what is the mineralogical associations of these phases. Seen that it's mainly with bismuth tellurides and chromite. But they also identified a different assemblage, which is more dominated by PGE sulf arsenides and some alloys with bismuth and antimony. And in these cases, also the host mineralogy looks different. So it's mainly some different or some large group of alteration silicates. So the idea is that also the PGE mineralogy is affected by alteration processes, in this case. And this is then of interest to look at the PGE mineralogy on the one hand, but of course, certainly for economic purposes, because processing the platinum group minerals from these kind of assemblages by flotation at least would lower the recovery rates or would cause some problems with processing these. So that's why also from an economic point of view, it's interesting to look at the exact PGE mineralogy, but also to look at the associated minerals. Another study I'd just like to mention here, working on modification, is a detailed work where they looked at various drill cores on the UG2 chromitite. You could see that you have these different chromitite seams, which all belongs to the UG2. There's these base, middle, and top chromitites, and here again, all these look very much like PGE sulfides. So all these white columns, these are different drill cores analyzing the proportions of platinum group minerals, and all these typically are PGE sulfides, different proportions. But they are fits again to what is shown the other studies, that this is a more or less typical assemblage from these chromatites. But also when there's in the upper part, this leader seam, these PGE sulfides are quite rare. So most of these platinum group minerals are these dark colored, which are PGE sulf arsenites. You have some contribution from arsenic to some extent. And what they argue is that you have an alteration by arsenic-bearing fluids, which then also affected the assemblage. So there are different ideas about this, but just to keep in mind that this processes then can also just affect your primary assemblage. Also, this can be seen by another study Linda Goodell and Sarah Jane did on the Stillwater complex. There also are various processes affecting the Stillwater. There are other people in the audience who could tell more about this, certainly. But here also we see that we have different PGE mineralogy. The idea is that platinum iron alloys, and to some extent these palladium sulfides, might absorb just directly from the sulfides. So we have these sulfuration. This is at fairly high temperature. These there are some occurrences where these PGEs are associated with these magnetites, and there what they found also is a bit more stranger PGE mineralogy. And so the idea from these is which are associated with the secondary magnetite, that they also represent some later processes affecting also the PGE mineralogy. So this can also be seen here by the associated minerals again, and also here, just to remind you, area and percentage and frequency data makes a slight difference. These are still relatively high temperature modifications. The last slides I would like to talk about something, the effect of PGE mineralogy on near surface processes, what we did. We have seen that sulfides can incorporate PGEs when it's unweathered ore, so pentlandite, chalcopyrite, and so on host platinum group elements, as we have seen. And this changes completely when we are at the near surface part, when there's weathering going on. The sulfides are destroyed, and we form a lot of new secondary silicate minerals. So secondary phases, clay minerals, smectite, manganese phases. And all these are then the new host also for these PGEs. So some of these PGEs are then incorporated or associated with this secondary silicate. And this weathering also has a large influence on our PGE mineralogy. So most of them are destroyed, particularly these PGE bismutotellurites. So it fits with our observation we have from places where we hardly find these. But we also see some very local variation or mobilizations. So this is some platinum group minerals, and there's some mobilization and reprecipitation of PGE-rich material just along these cracks. Also here, an example from the Merensky Reef, where compared to a pristine platinum group mineral, you would form some quite high modification. So this would be the influence on near surface weather. Oops. The last slide about this, and keep combining this with this pipe I've showed you at the beginning. It's a very early study where they looked at UG2 chromitite in the vicinity to this dunitic pipe. They have seen that close to this pipe, also the PGE mineralogy is affected. So there we have mainly platinum iron alloys, some arsenic, PGE arsenic phases. So this is a drill course close to the pipe. This is further away. And further away, you would get these typical assemblages you have, I've showed you previously, so dominated by PGE sulfides. So again, here we can see that the modification of the platinum group mineralogy in the vicinity of some kind of strange features would influence this pattern. He argued at that point that there are some volatiles involved in these, bringing these platinum iron alloys, but there are certainly also some other opportunities to explain this. But also, yeah, sizes of sulfides influences, so this has a strong modification. On the last slide, just a hint also for Anna Vimachalava, who will also she will also give a talk on the symposium about this. But she did a lot of work in synthesizing platinum group minerals. So you have the opportunity to really understand what are the formation conditions, at what kind of composition they form, what are the temperature conditions to form these different platinum group mineralogy or platinum group minerals. And the advantage is also that you can get some information about crystal structures, crystallography, and then some potential substitution of different elements on these PGE minerals. But also, of course, and this is done for, if you're in the PGM work like Louis Cabri, it's good then to have some synthesized platinum group minerals to get these parameters you would need for the IMA to get approved. Because as I showed you, these platinum group minerals are typically relatively small. But plotting these on binary ternary diagrams would then just give you these compositional variation as well. So I hope I could convince you a little bit that platinum group minerals are an interesting field of work. Certainly PGM assemblage is of interest to have a look at these, because this can tell you something about your primary assemblage, or if you have some iteration processes affecting these, because knowing what kind of setting you are, you would know what to expect, what kind of PGE mineralogy. And looking at the compositional variation, you might see if when you look at for places, or might even as some kind of exploration tool, what has been used to look at the formation conditions, which are rather ophiolitic, layered intrusions. And even, they have to start from somewhere, so they start on a nanometer scale. We do have these very, very small PGMs, which might have been already formed on a very, very early stage, arguing for some contribution from these embryos, precursors. But also looking at the textual is important, not only for economic point of view for beneficiation, but also because this then gives you also the information about the iteration and particular iteration types is weathering near surface or affects these. But knowing then the new mineralogical host can also help you for this recovery. And certainly when you study platinum group minerals in places can then give you some ideas of potential source region, but also looking at the stabilities of PGMs. Yes, so come to see Anna's talk in a few days. And just some compilation of some reference materials if you would like to read more about this and for your notes. Otherwise, thank you for your attention, and happy if there are any questions.
Question.
One question. So just about this slide, as I understood, these are alloys on their upper picture, the bright faces.
Yeah.
So how do you think they formed in this particular case? Because there's such beautiful heterocrystals, as I assume from this section.
Mhm. So yes, so these are these white ones are platinum iron alloys. One opportunity is that they have formed also in an early stage. So I've seen a picture from a Chinese colleague here some days ago where you have really a lot of alloys in a certain area of the sulfide. So this could be, for instance, on an earlier stage, because first of all, you have these very nicely shaped crystal shapes, and that these platinum iron, the alloys were formed even or collected by the sulfide liquid at a later stage, collected as discrete minerals already.
Oh, thank you. The thing that made it interesting for me is that, in particular, this section, their platinum to sulfide ratio will be quite incredible. Like, I think in weight percents, there will be much more platinum than sulfide in this particular section, but this is just like interesting thing. Oh, yes.
So this may be a naive question, but I wonder whether you can also kind of predict actually what PGM assemblage to expect in certain types of rocks. I'm asking because we are sort of interested at the moment in the porphyry copper deposit that's PGE enriched. What kind of PGM might you expect? Is that at all possible?
Yeah, I think there's Katie McFall probably also being able to talk about this, but you would probably have a specific PGE mineralogy. So then you would, particularly when you have more like hydrothermal influences, would transport, for instance, more palladium, would probably form more like some palladium alloys, for instance.
What about tellurium, bismuth, arsenic, these sort of things?
Tellurium, yeah.
So tellurium would be expected in particular?
I think so, yeah. I mean, there's Eduardo might be able to talk about this, mention this as well, but I at least, yeah, you can tell a specific assemblage from these, yeah. So it would be probably some palladium alloys, but probably also some bismuth tellurium phases. Certainly less arsenic, I would assume, and less platinum iron alloys.
Why less arsenic?
At least from this point of view, because they are really formed at high temperatures. So if you have less than, I don't know, what's the temperature range, a few hundred degrees, 500-600 in your setting. So I would assume you would not really at least form sperrolite as the major platinum arsenide.
Yeah, I just wanted to know thanks for all the talk, but your view on the nano PGMs, because if you assume that in the magma you're having these nano PGMs as the main process, then it becomes sort of the fact that they come at the sulfide after becomes a physical process rather than a chemical process. So it's like you're entrapping your PGMs, and still when we look at reefs and stuff like as arsenic, like arsenic, antimony, tin, they're very low partition coefficients, so they're not really enriched. When you go into bismuth, tellurium, they're very high partition coefficients, so they are enriched. So it's basically controlled by the partition coefficients. But if they are as nuggets, it's a physical process, then the partition coefficients shouldn't matter for that. I just wanted to know your view on that.
Yeah, so I think it's both. I think, and my feeling is that these nanometer size inclusions, they don't play a major role. So it's a physical entrapment at an early stage, but it's at least for these alloys. But as you say, and as stuff like you published, that I think this would make sense that at the end, if you have bismuth and tellurium, and if there's PGE still around, then these PGE would grab this bismuth and tellurium, forming discrete minerals just out of the sulfide liquid at the end, later stage. So it's not a major processes or major contribution, these nano stuff.
Anyone else?
Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was my impression that PGMs in the chromitides, you mainly said that chloride occurs as inclusions. What about the other PGEs? Is there expected to be, as you said, interstitial and be kind of exalt from the chromite, or how should I understand that?
So it's mainly laurite, yes, but there are also other inclusions in calcite chromite. I think it's important to distinguish between the PGMs which are sitting in the chromite and the ones which are interstitial, because there are some differences. But there are also different models or different ideas about this. But one opportunity is that having chromite where there's PGE inside and associates also what we have seen earlier with the sulfides, and then you desulfurize these, and then you form these PGMs in these just simply because it's they were pre-collected by sulfides, associated with sulfides. And the interstitial ones are probably, in some cases at least, just some later influences, and because that's why they show these more different mineralogy. So it certainly depends also on magma composition, how this is influenced on the different fractionation processes, getting IPGE and so on involved. That's why you would expect those more in these chromite.
Thank you.
So just one quick thing. So Rice wants to quickly introduce the symposium next year, the symposium. I also just want to quickly say something about keeping it tomorrow.
This one?
It'll be next door in the large chemistry. Looks very similar to this, that's much bigger. Please, those people who talk tomorrow, could you be here at about 8 o'clock so that we can upload your presentation on the desktop? It's important. So there are going to be 20 talks tomorrow, so we want to start at about 8 o'clock. So please don't forget to do that. There were a couple of you who asked me to order posters for you. These posters are partly ready. I think Moose was one of them, and there was somebody else. Benjamin knows where the poster place is, where you can pick it up if you bring a little bit of money. They want payments straight away. So please talk to Benjamin here, the gentleman with the beard. Right here. So you can pick up tomorrow during tea time, for example, or lunchtime, you can pick up your poster. The last thing before I said, so when we're done here, at 6 o'clock, of course, is the icebreaker. And before the icebreaker, and also during the icebreaker, we should look at the posters. One reason we should look at the posters is that tomorrow, when the main symposium starts, there will be other posters coming up. And I would like to ask the people who have posters on the Wager and Brown and on the chromite short post to take their posters then down tonight, so that there is space for the other people to put up their posters tomorrow. That includes my own posters too. I will take them down, several of them. So please don't forget that. And so the posters are just above the DJ gallery where we eat. So there's a staircase up there, and then the council chamber. Beautiful place. So let's go up there. I think you can take your drink up there also.
Okay, just a couple of words about that conference. You know that somewhere in August 1924, Hans Merensky discovered the Merensky Reef, and the next year there will be 100th anniversary. Actually, 2 years ago there was 150th anniversary of the Hans Merensky himself. So we because of COVID, we have not really celebrated this, so that's we're going to combine. And Geological Society of South Africa decided to run this conference dedicated to this discovery. Originally, it was idea they were thinking that maybe it will be just a kind of national, but then I suggest why not to have an international. It's important, and so that's why I invited all of you. Think about coming to this and contribute to this conference. Idea is to have, we already have one field trip run by Roger Schoon before the conference, and he goes to take his group to the place exactly where this discovery was done. So, and there were some other interesting places. Then after the conference will be some other field trips. We're still thinking about this. If then there will be some workshops. We're just thinking about that. If Steve will not change his mind, he will come to run his workshop. That's what I was asking you, just to remind. And then we also would like to have a special volume of the Geological Societies of Africa dedicated to just from the with the papers specifically kind of state of art tribute, basically tribute to the Marianski Reef and the state of art. What we know really on Marianski Reef after 100 years, exploiting this. There will be many companies coming to this. There's a great interest from all companies working around the Bushville complex to contribute to this meeting. So let's see how it will go. But for now, I invite you, and then maybe tomorrow is also during the I will tell, and then we'll just send maybe a message to that Platinum Symposium, your list, just to ask what kind of interest we have, and because that will depend how we will organize it. If there will be many people interested in coming, there will be one venue, if not then another venue. So we need to understand who is interested to come and take part in this meeting. So please think of this, and when there will be a message, please reply to me. Yes, please.
All right, will this be in Johannesburg, or will it be, say, for example, in London?
No, Johannesburg. No, of course not. That will be either Impala wants to have their venue. So the company contributed to this. So that will be, but that's why that they have about for 50 persons. There is another for 100. So we need to see how much people. We know approximately how much people will come from South Africa, but we need to see. We'd like to know how many international visitors we may have. So decide about the meeting, where to run and what kind of field trips to run. So I need to have a feedback. What you think about that conference? So that's an idea. Okay. Any questions? Please come anytime and talk to me. I'll be happy to answer.
Okay, thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to all the speakers.
Before that icebreaker, so please have a look at the posters now.
Yes. That's with girls.
Yep. I've just got my poster for the veteran ground printed in nearby office, but is there a sense to bring it now? I don't know. In about 10, maybe 15 minutes.
They might be closed now. It's almost 5 o'clock. Huh?
I'm now going to the printing office where I ordered to print the.
Oh, so they're still open?
Yeah.
Okay.
They're still open.
All right.
Is there a sense to bring it now?
Where's Moose? Yeah, bring it. Where's Moose Kruger now? He's already gone. Because he's really good. The guy with the beard. He also has a poster order. The figure that you find, the one
Any size that we need
for the posters?
No, for the
No.
not distortion.
No, it doesn't. It seems to be going well actually. So normal PPT, PowerPoint seems to be no problem. So is it the normal PowerPoint format these days? They are sort of elongated, yeah. Yeah, that's since a couple of years they're new ones. They're wider now than the old ones. That's true, but it seems to be no problem. Okay.
Stop sharing them.
Stop. And then probably it's now on the computer. Stop recording probably.